Namaskar. You are tuned into Uttarakhand Open University's community radio. Hello Haldwani, 91.2 FM. My dear community, talking to you today is a Gen Z professor, Kritika Trivedi, Vocational Department, starting the series Read NHEQF Together with a Gen Z professor. But why should you spend the next few minutes listening to a young professor like me talk about a great policy document? Perhaps the answer lies not in who I am today, but in who I was yesterday. I speak to you not as someone who has all the answers to your questions, but as someone who was sitting where my students are sitting today just a few months ago. I remember opening the government documents and quietly closing them again. I remember looking at the long PDFs filled with unfamiliar words and thinking, this is too complicated. Surely this isn't meant for students like me. I remember it. I remember it all. The language seemed distant. The terminology seemed technical. The document appeared to belong to communities, offices, and government websites, not to ordinary students trying to build their future. But today, I stand on the other side of the classrooms. Today, as a university teacher, I am expected not only to understand these documents, but also help implement them. And somewhere during this journey, I discovered something important. Policies do not enter our lives with loud announcements. They quietly enter our classrooms. They enter our examinations, our degrees, our careers. And before we realize it, they begin shaping our future. This is why I am here today. Not to read a government document to you, but to read it with you. Because that one word together in the series changes everything. As a professor of communication, I have learned one lesson above all. A professor's responsibility is not to tell students what to think. A professor's responsibility is to teach the students how to think. That is why the series is not called Explaining the NHEQF. It is called Reading NHEQF Together. Notice the word reading. Notice the word together. Because reading is not memorizing. Reading is questioning. Reading is understanding. Reading is agreeing where we find wisdom and respectfully questioning where we see challenges. And that, friends, I believe, is the true responsibility of a teacher in a democracy. And we professors at Uttarakhand Open University adhere by it. When I first read the document, the NHEQF, all 72 pages of it, I had my own assumptions. I thought I already knew what it would say. But then I asked myself a different question. What is this document actually saying, and not what do I think it is saying? And just that one question changed the way I read the document. Today, I invite you all to ask that same question with me. So, before we begin reading the framework in the coming episodes, let us first understand something much simpler. Why do we need a framework like the NHEQF? Let's imagine a game of cricket. Different countries, different players, different stadiums, different coaches, different playing conditions. Yet, everyone follows the same laws of cricket. Imagine, without common laws, would the international cricket ever exist? No. Education is not very different. Every university has different teachers, different courses, different classrooms, different methods of teaching. And that diversity is beautiful. That diversity should sustain. But somewhere, there are also a common understanding of one simpler question. The question is, what should a graduate actually know? Or more importantly, what should a graduate actually be able to do? That is the common understanding what the NHEQF, the National Higher Education Qualification Framework, tries to establish. As you will begin reading the document with me, you will notice one word appears again and again, which is benchmarking. At first, it sounds intimidating. Let me simplify it. Imagine you are climbing a mountain. Every few hundred meters, you see a marker, and then every 500 meters, you see another marker. Then 1000 meters, then 1500 meters. Those markers do not climb the mountain for you, nor do they tell the standards of your achievement. Instead, those markers tell you where you are. Similarly, the NHEQF attempts to do something similar for higher education. It creates a very important point, which is known as reference point. Those reference points help institutions to understand what learners are expected to achieve at different levels of their education degree. Another phrase that appears repeatedly throughout the document is expected learning outcomes. Now, notice something interesting. The framework does not only ask what should students study, it asks something much more powerful. After studying, what shall students be actually able to demonstrate? And dear friends, that small shift changes everything. Education is no longer only about remembering information. It is about applying knowledge, communicating ideas, solving problems, working ethically, thinking critically. And hence, the NHEQF promotes learning throughout life. In other words, a degree now is no longer merely a certificate that tells that you attended classes. It should reflect your capability. And it is important for you and me to discuss about these documents because long before students enter these classrooms, frameworks like them have already begun shaping the future of the classrooms. But let me also say something equally important. No policy document is perfect. No framework is beyond discussion. No educational reform becomes meaningful merely because it has been published. Policies become meaningful only when the teachers, the students, the institutions, and communities engage with them honestly. This is exactly what we shall do in this series. We shall not only read the NHEQF with blind acceptance, nor shall we reject it with prejudices. We shall read it with curiosity. We shall read it with understanding and ask various questions. Over the coming episodes, we will explore the NHEQF in more detail. We will look at its potential advantages, challenges, and creative solutions. This series titled Reading NHEQF Together with a Gen Z Professor calls everyone to explore their position in relation to having a dialogue with the policymakers of this nation. I, as a professor, must act as a bridge, a translator who translates the complex language of the NHEQF document into the language of everyday life. So, I ask you today, are you ready to understand the NHEQF and what it means for your future? Are you ready to become an informed citizen rather than a passive consumer of information? If your answer is yes, then join me on this journey. In our next episodes, we will begin a deep dive into the NHEQF by thoroughly understanding its foreword. Until then, it is Kritika Trivedi signing off from Hello Haldwani 91.2 FM. Thank you and keep learning.